The conference room at Apex Aerospace was heavy with silence. 200 engineers sat frozen, their faces drained of color. CEO Darren Slade stood at the head of the table, fists clenched, voice shaking with rage. 10 months, 50 engineers, MIT, Stanford, Caltech, and you can't even make the damn thing run for 1 second. Through the reinforced glass wall, the X-7000 engine sat cold and lifeless in the testing chamber, a $50 million monument to failure. Slade's eyes swept the room. Then he stopped. A woman was mopping the floor in the observation deck. Gray hair pulled back, wrinkled hands moving with quiet precision. A janitor. He smirked. "You. Come here," he said. She hesitated, confused. Slade stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "If you pull this off, I'll quit my job. Right now. Cut to black." The Cleaning Lady. Based on a true story. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the room. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Behind the glass, the X-7000 engine loomed sleek silver and silent. Months of labor, millions of dollars, and the best minds in aerospace engineering had birthed nothing but smoke and failure. Darren Slade turned from the window, his anger now icy. "This engine was supposed to change the future of propulsion," he said, voice calm but sharp. "Instead, it's changing the future of this company, and not in a good way." His gaze shifted to the engineers seated before him, rows of expensive suits, Ivy League diplomas hanging over bowed heads. "You've all failed." The room was still breathless when the janitor stepped in. Grace Alvarez, mid-50s, faded uniform, no title, no respect. 200 eyes locked on her. She didn't speak, just stood quietly holding a mop handle like a spear, and the air shifted. Darren Slade pointed directly at her, his voice slicing through the silence. "You see this?" he sneered, turning to the board of directors. "This is where we are now. 50 engineers, millions of dollars, and our best solution is a janitor." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. A few chuckled. Most looked away. Grace didn't move. "Come on," Slade said. "Let's give her a shot. Maybe she can fix the engine with a mop and some elbow grease." His vice president, Leonard Walsh, chimed in with a smirk. "She's probably better with engines than half this room. I bet her cousins fix cars in their driveways all day." Grace's eyes flicked up, calm, unreadable. "I have a green card," she said softly, "and a mechanical engineering degree." 15 years ago, the laughter stopped. Slade blinked. "Wait, what did you say?" Grace's voice didn't waver. "I said I was an engineer before I cleaned your floors." Dead silence. Then Slade smiled, the kind that hides a knife. "Well then, let's put that to the test." Darren Slade paced slowly, theatrically, like a game show host savoring the setup. He stopped just inches from Grace, close enough for her to smell his cologne, expensive, overbearing, laced with arrogance. "How about this?" he said, voice loud and smooth. "You fix the X-7000 engine in the next 2 hours." He pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and turned the screen toward the room. $1 million, tax-free. Transferred instantly. Yours. Gasps echoed through the boardroom. Even the directors looked up startled. But Slade raised a finger, his tone sharpening. "If you fail, and you will fail, you're done." His eyes narrowed. "Fired. No severance, no references, and I'll make sure no building in Chicago ever hires you again. Not even to scrub toilets." He leaned in. "Do you understand?" Grace didn't flinch. Her gaze slid past him, to the engine. "I understand perfectly," she said, and for the first time she smiled just barely. The room tensed as if holding a collective breath. Grace Alvarez took a single step forward. Her mop now rested quietly in the corner, forgotten. She looked Darren Slade square in the eyes. "I accept," she said, her voice calm, clear. "But I have conditions." Murmurs broke out behind her. Engineers exchanged puzzled glances. The audacity, conditions. Slade raised an eyebrow. Conditions, Grace nodded. I want 30 minutes alone with the engine, full access to its diagnostic system, no interference, and everyone stays at least 10 feet back. Laughter erupted. You think this is some movie? One engineer scoffed. Another whispered, She's serious. Slade crossed his arms, grinning. Fine. 30 minutes. Knock yourself out. He turned to the room. Let's all watch the cleaning lady play engineer. As people filed out, Grace remained still. Only when the last pair of eyes left the testing chamber did she move, walking toward the X7000 like someone approaching an old friend. And as she placed her hand gently on the metal shell, she whispered, It's been a long time. 3:12 a.m. The halls of Apex Aerospace were dark and silent. Grace Alvarez pushed her industrial cleaning cart through the empty corridor, the wheels squeaking softly over polished marble. For 15 years, she had walked these floors. 15 years of fluorescent lights and ammonia. 15 years of erasing other people's messes while her own dreams gathered dust. But Grace wasn't just cleaning. She was observing, listening, watching. Every late-night blueprint forgotten in a conference room. Every overheard conversation between engineers too proud to whisper. Every discarded prototype in the trash. She absorbed it all. Her reflection flickered in the glass of the testing chamber. On the other side, the X7000, cold incomplete, broken. She stared at it for a long moment. Then walked to a small locker hidden in the janitor's supply room and opened it. Inside, a worn leather notebook. She ran her fingers over the cracked spine, eyes softening. Carlos. The pages of the leather notebook were yellowed with time corners curled from years of use. Grace sat alone in the empty cafeteria under harsh fluorescent lights flipping through them like sacred scripture. Diagrams, formulas, handwritten notes in tight, precise lettering. Each line was the legacy of Carlos Alvarez, her husband. She remembered his hands, once strong and steady, trembling in a hospital bed. His voice weak, but his mind burning bright. I have to finish it, Grace, he whispered, gripping the notebook. This engine. It changes everything. It's our future. For Sophia. He worked until the very end, a dying man racing death with equations. 3 times the efficiency. 60% less fuel. Revolutionary cooling systems. And just days before he passed, he'd pressed this notebook into her hands. Someday, he said, when the world needs it most. He never finished the sentence. But Grace did. She carried his legacy in a mop bucket, until now. The memory hit her like a bruise that never faded. A sterile government office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her daughter Sophia, only 7, clutching a worn teddy bear. Across the desk sat the immigration officer, impassive procedural stamping lives with indifferent ink. I'm sorry, Mrs. Alvarez, he said. Not looking up. Your mechanical engineering degree from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico isn't recognized here. Grace blinked. But I graduated top of my class. I worked 10 years in thermal systems. You'll need to start over, he interrupted. In English. At an accredited U.S. university. Grace's voice cracked. I can't afford that. I understand, he said, though he didn't. Next. Stamp. Like that her career, her identity vanished. Grace knelt beside Sophia. Mommy, why are you crying? The little girl whispered. Grace pulled her close, breathing in strawberry shampoo. It's okay, mi amor, she lied. Mommy will find another job. That other job turned out to be mopping floors on the graveyard shift at Apex Aerospace. Minimum wage. No benefits. Invisible. Grace scrubbed toilets in the same buildings where engineers debated fluid dynamics. She emptied trash bins filled with failed blueprints and cold coffee. No one ever looked at her twice. But every night, she returned, pushing her cart past glass-walled labs, wiping down stainless steel surfaces, polishing the floors beneath glowing award plaques. Sophia never knew how tired she was. Grace made sure of that. She was there for every school recital, every science fair, every tearful night when homework felt impossible. While the world dismissed her as a cleaner, she was quietly raising a future MIT scholar. She'd traded equations for cleaning supplies, dreams for duty. But every time she passed that engine lab, the one labeled restricted access, she paused and smiled, because she knew something no one else did. It started with a forgotten blueprint. Late one night, Grace was wiping down the conference table on the 47th floor when she noticed a set of schematics left behind edges curled, coffee-stained. She almost tossed it in the recycling, but something caught her eye. The cooling system. Simple, elegant, familiar. Her breath caught. She studied the lines, the flow pathways, the pressure distribution. It was almost identical to the sketch on page 37 of Carlos's notebook. Almost. But Apex's version had gaps, tiny errors, only someone who knew the original could see. She stared at it for a long time, the paper trembling in her gloved hands. A week later, another diagram appeared on a whiteboard in Lab 3B. Then a prototype model discarded in a hallway bin. Piece by piece, the picture came into focus. They were building Carlos's engine. But they didn't understand it, and they didn't know who was watching. Each night after the last light went out and the last voice faded down the hallway, Grace returned to the testing lab. She had memorized the guard rotations. She knew which motion sensors had blind spots. 15 years of cleaning gave her access no keycard ever could. She'd wheel in her cart mop in plain sight and sit just outside the security camera's line of sight. Then she'd pull out Carlos's notebook. She studied for hours, cross-referencing equations, watching live diagnostic feeds through the glass, sometimes pressing her palm against the titanium shell of the prototype. They had all the pieces, but they didn't know how to make them fit. They'd chased complexity, chasing prestige. Carlos had designed for function for beauty in simplicity. Grace understood every curve, every coil, every mistake they didn't know they'd made. By sunrise, she was back in the shadows, pushing her cart past engineers who never met her eyes. They thought she was cleaning their future, but she was building her own. The phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the stillness of another long, silent night. Grace pulled off her gloves, checked the screen. "Sophia," she answered quickly, wiping sweat from her brow. "Hola, mi amor. Everything okay?" Her daughter's voice came through bright, trembling with joy. "Mom, I got it." Grace blinked. "Got what?" "The full scholarship. MIT accepted me." Grace gasped. Her knees almost gave out. "They said my essay about Dad was one of the best they've ever read," Sophia continued. "I told them how he never gave up, how you never did either." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks before she even realized. "He would be so proud of you, mija," she whispered. "So proud." Sophia's voice softened. "No, Mom. I'm proud of you. You gave up everything for me. You never stopped believing in us. I promise I won't let you down." Grace looked through the glass at the engine. "No," she said, voice steady. "We're just getting started." The testing chamber was dark, humming with dormant energy. Grace stood alone, staring at the X7000 through a reinforced glass. Her reflection overlapped with the engine's silhouette, past and future blurred into one. She pulled out her old smartphone screen. Cracked case held together with tape. Dialed. Sophia picked up instantly. "Mom, it's 3 a.m. Are you okay?" "I need your help," Grace said. "Right now." "Of course. Anything." Grace lowered her voice. "Open my email account. The password is your father's birthday plus our wedding anniversary." A pause. Then, "Got it. There's a folder called Carlos Legacy. Send me everything in that folder," Grace said. "Now." 30 seconds later, her phone chimed. She opened the files and her screen lit up with Carlos's genius. Schematics, simulations, equations, a complete working model. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she whispered, "Let's see what they missed." And behind the glass, the X7000 waited, flawed, incomplete, and about to meet its maker's wife. Grace stepped into the testing chamber, the heavy doors hissing shut behind her. Through the observation glass, 200 engineers and board members watched, murmuring with confusion. What was she doing? She ignored them all. She walked to the massive digital whiteboard on the far wall and pulled out her phone. On the screen, Carlos's original schematics. Her fingers hovered for a moment. Then she began to draw, line by line, curve by curve. Her hand moved with purpose, not hesitation, not guessing, but certainty. She had traced these lines 1,000 times in her mind over sleepless nights on break-room napkins, in dreams soaked with grief and determination. Lines became parts. Parts became systems. The X7000, but different. Fixed. Engineers gasped. The boardroom fell silent. Even David Chen, chief engineer, leaned forward, whispering, That's not possible." Grace stepped back, set the marker down, and turned toward the glass. "This," she said calmly, "is how it was meant to be." The room behind the glass was frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Grace stood before the digital whiteboard, her revised engine schematics glowing behind her, cleaner, sharper, complete. Then she said the words that cracked the silence wide open. "This isn't your design." Her voice was calm, steady. "It was created 10 years ago by Carlos Alvarez. My husband." Gasps rippled through the engineers. A few stood. Others simply stared, stunned. "That's impossible," CEO Darren Slade barked from the back of the room. "This design was developed in-house." Grace reached for her phone and tapped the screen. The boardroom's main monitor blinked to life, displaying an official document. U.S. Patent Number 7829451, filed March 15, 2014. Inventor Carlos M. Alvarez. Every eye locked on the screen. The design was unmistakable. David Chen paled. "That's the X7000's core, down to the cooling system." Grace met Slade's glare with ice. "You didn't invent this engine," she said. "You stole it." Darren Slade's face twisted with denial. "This is slander," he snapped. "You have no proof we ever saw this design." Grace didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket and held up a small black USB drive. "I've been collecting proof for 15 years," she said, "while scrubbing your floors and emptying your trash." She inserted the drive into the testing room console. The conference screen changed again. Apex Aerospace internal server logs. Timestamp: August 23, 2014. 3:47 a.m. IP address: Apex HQ file. Accessed: Carlos Engine RV8 .pdf. Murmurs turned to shock. Grace stepped closer to the mic. "While my husband lay dying in a hospital bed, someone from your company hacked into his personal laptop and stole everything." She clicked again. "Digital forensics reports, security footage, voicemails. I have the downloads, the metadata, the emails, the who, when, how, and where." She looked directly at Slade. "You didn't just steal a design. You stole a dying man's legacy." The conference room exploded into chaos. Voices overlapped. Board members stood shouting over one another. Some demanded answers. Others reached for their phones. Darren Slade's face turned from red to ashen. "This is a setup," he shouted. "It's all fabricated." Grace stood calm behind the glass, the engine humming quietly behind her like a sleeping beast. Then the doors burst open. 6 figures strode in black suits, badges gleaming. The lead agent, a silver-haired woman with a voice like steel, stepped forward. "Darren Slade," she asked. He froze. "I'm Special Agent Michelle Walsh, FBI. You're under arrest for theft of intellectual property, computer fraud, and industrial espionage." Gasps. A chair toppled. Slade stumbled backward. "You can't do this. This is my company," he shouted. Walsh didn't blink. Not anymore. 2 agents moved in, reading his rights as they cuffed him. Grace watched from behind the glass, unmoving. 15 years. 15 years of silent sacrifice and waiting. Justice had arrived. Darren Slade struggled against the cuffs, eyes wild. "This is a witch hunt," he screamed. "You'll get nothing. My lawyers will destroy her. She's just a cleaning lady. Nobody will believe her." The FBI agents tightened their grip. Grace stepped forward, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "You're wrong." Everyone turned. She held up the USB again. "For the past 3 months, I've worked with the FBI. Every document you left on your desks, every drunken confession at office parties, every trace of the files you thought were deleted." She tapped the console once more. Footage appeared on screen, a grainy security video from a Christmas party 3 years ago. Slade's voice slurred with champagne. "Rodriguez, that Mexican engineer, he was dying anyway. We just cleaned up his ideas." Gasps filled the room. Grace looked directly at him. "You could have hired Carlos," she said quietly. "He would have built it for you. But you didn't want the man. You just wanted the machine." The cuffs clicked tighter around Darren Slade's wrists. His face twisted with desperation, pride giving way to panic. Suddenly, he spun toward his vice president. "It was Leonard's idea," he shouted. He handled the files. "He told me the guy was dying anyway." Leonard Walsh, startled, took a step back. "That's a lie," he snapped. "You were obsessed with Rodriguez's designs. You said, and I quote, 'Nobody will care. It's not like his wife will ever figure it out.'" The FBI agents exchanged glances. Special Agent Walsh turned to Leonard. "Mr. Walsh, would you like to make a statement?" Leonard swallowed hard. "If I cooperate. That helps my sentence, right?" She nodded once. Leonard collapsed into the nearest chair. "I'll tell you everything. Emails, meeting notes, server access, passwords." It spilled out of him like floodwater breaching a dam. Slade lunged furious, got one wild punch in before agents pinned him to the floor. Chaos behind the glass. But Grace stood still, eyes fixed on the X7000. The engine was just the beginning. As Darren Slade was dragged out in handcuffs, silence returned to the room. Then a voice broke it smooth, accented, commanding. Mr. Takeda, CEO of Yamamoto Industries and the man behind Apex's $500 million investment, rose slowly. He bowed his head respectfully toward Grace. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said on behalf of the board, "I offer my deepest apologies." Grace nodded once, composed but unyielding. Takeda continued, "We wish to make this right. We are prepared to offer $50 million for exclusive rights to your husband's patents and a 15% equity stake in Apex Aerospace." The room gasped. Even the board members shifted in their seats. But Grace didn't blink. She looked around at the suits, the faces that had ignored her for 15 years. And she shook her head. "No." Takeda hesitated. "No, I'm not selling Carlos's legacy," she said. "But I'll license the technology. On one condition." Takeda's eyes narrowed. "Name it." Grace stood taller. "I want to run the company." The room exploded. "CEO?" "That's absurd. She's a janitor. You can't be serious." The board members shouted over one another, their polished voices cracking under disbelief. Even David Chen, chief engineer, looked stunned. "Mrs. Alvarez, with all due respect, running a company like this requires experience." Grace cut in calmly. She stepped forward, unwavering. "I hold a master's degree in mechanical engineering. I've designed cooling systems for 3 nuclear power plants in Mexico. I hold 14 patents under my maiden name, all still valid." She glanced around the room. "I'm the only person here who truly understands the X7000. I've been watching this company from the ground up for 15 years. "You want leadership," she said. "Start with someone who's seen the cracks from the foundation." Silence. Then, to everyone's shock, Mr. Takeda smiled. He stood nodding slowly. "You know what he said. I think. That's exactly what this company needs." He extended his hand. "Deal, Mrs. Alvarez. Or should I say, CEO Alvarez." The headlines were still breaking. "Janitor becomes CEO." after exposing 500 malnumber tech scandal. From mop to boardroom, the rise of Grace Alvarez. But inside Apex Aerospace now, hers the real shift had just begun. Grace stood at the front of the same conference room where she had once been humiliated. Now she addressed the board. As their equal, her voice was calm, clear. "My first act as CEO," she said, "isn't to fire anyone." Murmurs rippled. David Chen raised an eyebrow. "You were lied to," she continued. "Used just like I was." She looked around the room. "But today, we change that." She turned to the whiteboard and wrote 4 words, from janitor to engineer. A pause. "We're launching a full scholarship program. For custodial staff, cafeteria worker security. Anyone overlooked like I was." Dead silence. Then slowly, Chen stood. "You're serious." Grace smiled. Dead serious. 5 years later, dawn broke over downtown Chicago. Golden light glinting off the newly renamed glass tower, Alvarez Innovations. The parking lot was mostly empty except for one reserved space marked simply CEO. G. Alvarez, Grace, stepped out of a quiet silver sedan. No chauffeur, no entourage, just a leather satchel and a cup of black coffee. Same hour, same building. But now she walked through the front doors not as a ghost, but as the one whose name lit the skyline. She passed security, greeted the janitorial team by name, waved at cafeteria staff prepping breakfast. This was routine. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., she met with cleaning crews and maintenance workers, not to check their work, but to hear their ideas. She believed brilliance didn't care about titles, and in 5 years her belief had paid off. Over 500 former blue-collar employees were now engineers, researchers, developers, all trained through her From Janitor to Engineer program. This wasn't just a company anymore, it was a movement. The elevator doors slid open on the top floor of Alvarez Innovations, now home to the Carlos M. Alvarez Memorial Research Center. A portrait hung in the lobby, Carlos smiling in his lab coat eyes full of quiet brilliance. Grace stood before it holding a cup of Colombian coffee, her gaze soft. Behind her, the elevator chimed. "Mom," she turned. Sophia, 22 now. Graduation sash still folded in her bag, a small MIT pin gleaming on her blazer. Grace smiled. "Mija." They embraced. No words for a long moment, just warmth and memory. "He would be so proud," Sophia whispered, eyes flicking to the portrait. "I tell him that every morning," Grace said gently. Sophia reached into her backpack, pulled out a folder. "I've been working on something," she said. "A cooling adaptation for the CR7000 based on Dad's rotational draft model." Grace blinked, then grinned. "Let's see it. 2 generations, 1 vision." And they were just getting started. The email came at 4:42 a.m. Subject: NASA confirmation. Mission Ares 1. Grace opened it with steady hands, but her heart raced like a drum. She read it once, then again. "We are pleased to confirm the final selection of the CR7000 propulsion system for NASA's manned Mars mission Ares 1. She stared at the screen, speechless. The CR7000, the perfected version of Carlos's engine. The dream they built in notebooks and hospital rooms in silence. Now, it was going to Mars. Downstairs, the building was beginning to stir. Lights flickered on, teams clocked in, but Grace sat motionless, tears welling in her eyes. She stood and walked to the portrait of Carlos, ran a hand over the frame. "You always dreamed of the stars," she whispered. "Now your engine will take us there." Behind her, Sophia stepped in, reading over her shoulder. "Dad made it," she said softly. "No, Grace," replied, voice breaking into a smile. "We all did." Stockholm. The Nobel Ceremony. The grand hall glittered with chandeliers and gold trim. Scientists, diplomats, and leaders from across the world sat in silence as Grace Alvarez stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no designer labels, just her wedding ring, and a small pin on her lapel, a hand gripping a wrench reaching for a star, the emblem of Alvarez Innovations. She stood behind the podium, the Nobel medal cradled in her hands. And then she spoke not like a CEO or an inventor, but like a mother, a widow, a woman who had once scrubbed floors while her dreams sat locked in a janitor's locker. "I accept this award," she began, "not as a symbol of success, but as proof. Proof that genius is not limited by income accent or uniform." She held the medal up to the lights. "This belongs to my husband Carlos, to my daughter Sophia, and to every brilliant mind still trapped behind a mop, a cash register, or a warehouse shift." The audience was silent. Many cried. And then they stood one by one for a 12-minute ovation. 1 week later, Grace sat alone in her office, the Nobel medal resting quietly beside a framed photo of Carlos. Outside her window, Chicago shimmered under a winter sunset. The skyline was the same, but her world had changed forever. Her inbox chimed. Subject, from Detroit, request for help. She clicked. "Dear Mrs. Alvarez, my name is Linda Chen. I'm a single mother working nights as a janitor at a battery factory in Detroit. I have an idea that could increase solar battery efficiency by 18%, but no one listens to a cleaning lady. Can you help me?" Grace stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she smiled, the same quiet, knowing smile she'd once worn when pushing her cart past Apex's engine lab at 3 a.m. She began typing. "Dear Linda, send me everything. And if you could come to Chicago. At Alvarez Innovations, we're always looking for brilliant minds no matter what uniform they wear." She clicked send. Outside, the city lights blinked on, and somewhere in Detroit a new story had just begun. The top floor of Alvarez Innovations was quiet, bathed in soft amber light from the setting sun. Grace stood before a massive window overlooking Lake Michigan, coffee in hand. Behind her, the Carlos M. Alvarez Memorial Research Center buzzed with quiet energy young engineers sketching designs, running simulations, arguing with passion. On the far wall, Carlos's portrait watched over them all, kind eyes and a gentle, knowing smile. Grace spoke softly, almost to herself. "She graduates next spring," she said. "Summa cum laude. Just like we dreamed." She glanced down at a framed photo of Sophia in a cap and gown holding her diploma and Carlos's notebook. "She's already working on the next generation of propulsion. Says she wants to finish what you started." Grace sipped her coffee and smiled. "You'd love her work. She has your stubbornness and your spark." The door opened. David Chen, now Chief Technology Officer, stepped in. Linda Chen just arrived. "She's got a prototype in her suitcase." Grace turned eyes bright. "Bring her up. It's time she got a desk. And a team." The elevator doors slid open. Linda Chen stepped out, eyes wide behind scratched glasses, clutching a canvas tote bag like it carried the future. She wore an oversized parka, scuffed sneakers, and the unmistakable posture of someone used to being overlooked. Grace rose from her desk. "Linda," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Welcome to Alvarez Innovations." Linda hesitated, then shook it firm grip but trembling fingers. I didn't think you'd respond." Grace smiled. "Neither did I. 15 years ago." She gestured to a chair and Linda sat, still gripping her bag. "I brought the prototype," she blurted. "It's not perfect, but "You brought belief," Grace interrupted gently. "That's rarer than perfection." Linda's eyes welled. Grace leaned in. "Here's what happens next. You get an R&D team, full lab access, and a mentor." Linda blinked. "Who?" Grace tapped her chest, then smiled. "Me." For the first time in her life, Linda sat across from someone who didn't just see her. She was seen. 3 days later, midnight. The small testing lab on the 49th floor buzzed with quiet anticipation. Linda stood beside her prototype, a compact, palm-sized solar battery module wrapped in copper mesh and translucent polymer layers. Her hands trembled as she made final adjustments. Grace stood across from her arms, crossed eyes steady. "You triple-checked the regulators?" she asked. Linda nodded. "Twice. Then once more just in case." The room was silent. "Okay," Grace said. "Let's see what you've got." Linda inhaled deeply and flipped the switch. A faint hum filled the room. Sensors blinked to life. Numbers rolled across the monitor. Then a pause, and the screen stabilized. Output efficiency plus 18.6%. Linda gasped. It worked. It actually worked. Grace nodded, eyes never leaving the data. Not just worked, it's scalable. Linda's voice cracked. "They said I was just a janitor." Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. "They said that about me too. 2 women. 2 uniforms the world dismissed. And now 2 inventors rewriting the rules." A week later, Grace stood behind a podium again. But this time it wasn't Stockholm. It was Chicago. Home. Before her sat journalists, students, factory workers, janitors, cafeteria cooks, young mothers holding babies. Behind her, a banner with 5 words in bold white letters. The Innovation Fellowship Initiative. Grace took a breath. "When I started cleaning floors at Apex Aerospace," she began. "No one asked what I knew, only what I was wearing." She looked directly into the crowd. There are millions of minds just like mine, like Linda's, like Carlos's, working the night shift, changing the world in silence. A beat. Not anymore. Applause rose. "We're opening 5,000 full scholarships in the next 12 months. STEM programs, engineering fellowships, paid internships, full mentorship, starting now." Cameras flashed. Some cried. Others just stared stunned. And for those still in the shadows, Grace paused. "You're not invisible." She smiled. "You're next." And somewhere in that crowd, a janitor named Omar, clutching a worn sketchbook, began to believe again. The rooftop garden of Alvarez Innovations swayed gently in the evening breeze. City lights shimmered below. Grace sat on a stone bench, Carlos's leather notebook resting beside her. Footsteps approached. Sophia. Blazer, off sleeves, rolled up a tablet in hand. They approved the next prototype, she said, breathless with excitement. "We're testing it on the SpaceX Polaris capsule next quarter." Grace smiled. "I heard. You're making good trouble." Sophia sat beside her. "I'm not doing it alone." "No," Grace said softly. "But you're ready." A silence passed between them, warm, full of knowing. Sophia looked at her mother. "What about you?" Grace looked out across the skyline, eyes soft but distant. "I built the bridge. Now it's your turn to walk people across it." She stood, placed the notebook in Sophia's hands. "You know what this means," Grace said. Sophia nodded, her voice thick. "It means we never forget where we started." Grace smiled. "And we never stop bringing others with us." 2 years later, the auditorium was packed. Spotlights swept across the stage. Families filled every seat, many holding signs, flowers, and trembling hands. A banner hung above the stage in bold letters, "Innovation Fellowship, Class 1 Graduation." Grace sat in the front row beside Sophia, her eyes misty. "Feels different sitting down here," she whispered. Sophia grinned. "You earned it." A name echoed from the podium. Omar Reyes, Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering, magna cum laude. The crowd erupted. A man in his 40s stepped onto the stage, tears in his eyes, holding a diploma in one hand and a mop handle in the other, raised like a torch. He looked straight at Grace, lips trembling. "Thank you," he mouthed. Name after name followed. Janitors, bus drivers, line cooks, security guards, people the world never noticed now dressed in robes and dreams. Grace stood as the last student crossed the stage. She looked around. The room wasn't full of graduates. It was full of proof that brilliance never needed permission, only opportunity. Back in her office, the lights low and the city quiet, Grace scrolled through messages on her private inbox. Thousands had written after the graduation ceremony, But one message stopped her. Subject, from Nairobi, age 12. Please read. She opened it. Hi, Miss Grace. My name is Amina. I live in Nairobi. I saw your speech on YouTube. My mama is a cleaner like you. I want to build airplanes like your husband. But people laugh when I say that. They say I should dream smaller. Can you tell me what to do? Love, Amina. Grace stared at the words. 12 years old, half a world away, but somehow she felt like she was looking into a mirror from another time. She clicked reply. Dear Amina, never dream smaller, dream louder. I'm forwarding your message to our Nairobi office. They'll send you books, mentorship, and a computer. Also, tell your mama she's a hero. You already are, too. Love, Grace. She hit send, leaned back in her chair, and whispered to the quiet, This is how we change everything. The unveiling hall at Alvarez Innovations buzzed with anticipation. Engineers, students, journalists, and former fellowship graduates filled every seat. On stage stood Sophia Alvarez, now head of Advanced Propulsion Systems, confident, composed, carrying both legacy and vision. Beside her, Linda Chen, former janitor turned lead battery architect, wearing a sleek lab coat with grease still on the sleeves. Behind them, hidden beneath a silk drape, was their creation. Sophia stepped to the mic. My father dreamed of getting humanity to Mars. My mother made sure the world heard him. And together, we're building what comes next. She looked to Linda. Linda nodded and pulled the cloth away. The crowd gasped. Sleek, compact. Light refracted off polished titanium. The CRX-1, the world's first self-regulating propulsion unit powered by integrated solar kinetic battery cells, built by the daughter of a janitor, and designed by a janitor-turned-engineer. Sophia smiled. This engine was designed not by privilege but by persistence. Linda added, And now it belongs to everyone. The applause was thunderous, and history moved forward. Grace sat at her desk a quiet moment between meetings when David Chen entered with a tablet in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. You need to see this, he said. On the screen, a map filled with glowing dots. Adoption reports, he explained. The CRX-1. It's already changing everything. She scrolled. India. Modified CRX-1. Units powering rural hospitals with zero-emission energy. Peru. Mountain schools using solar kinetic systems to replace failing diesel generators. South Sudan. Humanitarian drones delivering food running on CRX-1 cores. Chen pointed to the final update. Germany just approved it for their deep space satellite fleet. They called it the most efficient civilian-grade propulsion system in modern history. Grace stared at the map dots multiplying like stars across continents. She whispered almost to herself, Carlos didn't just build an engine. He built a heartbeat. Chen nodded. And you made sure it kept beating. She turned back to the screen, tears brimming. Not for herself, but for the millions now powered by a dream once hidden in a mop closet. The auditorium was smaller than usual on purpose. No lights, no media. Just 30 new innovation fellows seated in worn folding chairs, notebooks on their laps, eyes wide with equal parts hope and disbelief. At the front, standing without notes, podium, or spotlight, Grace Alvarez. Now silver-haired, calm as ever, and more powerful in presence than any title could convey. She looked at the room. I won't give you a speech, she began, because no speech gave me a chance. A few chuckled softly. She paced slowly. You'll hear the words impossible a lot. You'll hear that you're too late, too poor, too foreign, too female, too old, too unqualified. She stopped. They told me all of that, a beat, and I built an engine that took humanity to Mars. Silence. Then, you don't owe anyone perfection, but you do owe the world your brilliance. She held up Carlos's old leather notebook. Start here, she said, handing it to the youngest recruit. Then build something better. No applause, just awe, because sometimes the loudest legacy walks in quiet steps. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Carlos M. Alvarez Research Center. Top floor. Grace walked slowly down the glass corridor, her heels silent against the polished floor. Sunlight poured in from panoramic windows bathing the labs in gold. To her left, a teenage girl in a hijab configuring propulsion vectors on a holographic console. To her right, an older man with oil-stained hands and a name tag that once read maintenance now adjusting a gyroscopic stabilizer. 1,000 accents, 1,000 backstories. One mission. Every workstation had 2 nameplates, one with a name and one with where they came from. Alejandro, former dishwasher. Now thermal systems specialist. Nguyen, former bus driver. Now fluid dynamics engineer. Grace paused before a glass wall. Behind it a room titled the Invention Room, in honor of Carlos M. Alvarez. Inside hung his original sketches, faded, worn, wholly. Below them, a quote etched in steel. Sometimes the best ideas don't need discovery, just belief. Grace touched the glass eyes damp and whispered, "You were never invisible. They just didn't know how to see you yet." Launch day. T-minus 6 hours. Cape Canaveral shimmered under the morning sun. In the private viewing room above Mission Control, Grace stood near the window, coffee in hand, watching the crew prep the Ares Nova Humanity's first permanent Mars transport system. At the heart of it, the CRX-1 core powered by Carlos's legacy, perfected by Sophia. The door opened. Sophia stepped in flight badge on her jacket, eyes alert but tender. "You should be the one on the stage today," she said. Grace smiled. "I already was." Sophia walked to her mother's side, silent for a beat. "He'd be proud of you." Grace nodded, her voice soft. "He'd be proud of you." Sophia looked out at the rocket. "Do you think we're ready?" Grace glanced at her daughter, confident, brilliant, brave. "I think the world's just catching up to what we've always been." Sophia wrapped her arm around Grace's shoulder. "Next stop. The stars." Grace whispered almost to herself, "And this time they'll know exactly who got us there." The rocket pierced the clouds. From the observation deck, Grace watched in silence as the Ares Nova carried humanity into a new chapter on an engine built from love loss and unwavering belief. Behind her, reporters spoke in hushed tones. Across the world, millions watched the launch, but Grace didn't hear them. She heard Carlos whispering equations in their tiny apartment. She heard Sophia reading MIT acceptance letters with shaking hands. She heard her own footsteps, mopping forgotten floors under fluorescent lights. And then just silence. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a single item, Carlos's worn wedding ring. She kissed it once and let it rest on the railing, then turned to the camera, now facing her. "For 15 years, I cleaned the offices of people who never learned my name." She smiled, eyes glistening. "But I remembered theirs, and now they remember mine." She stepped closer. "If you're watching this wondering if your story matters, wondering if your voice is too quiet, let me say this. Sometimes the cleaning lady does fix the engine. Sometimes she rebuilds the whole system. Share this video if you believe in unseen heroes. Comment if you've ever been overlooked. Subscribe if you're ready to prove the world wrong, quietly, brilliantly, and without asking permission. Because now, it's your turn.